Democrats in a closed-door meeting. Mueller almost right away shut down President Trump's claims of total exoneration.
So the report did not conclude that he did not commit obstruction of justice. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And what about total exoneration? Did you actually totally exonerate the president?
No.
So despite that, the president and his allies are claiming victory. Listen.
I don't think there's anybody that would say he did well. This was one of the worst performances in the history of our country.
All right, joining us now to talk about all of this, we have Maggie Haberman, White House correspondent for the New York Times and CNN political analyst, and Jeffrey Toobin, former federal prosecutor and CNN chief legal analyst. Great to have both of you here. So let's just talk about the top line conclusions that Robert Mueller testified to yesterday. They were in the report, but he put a finer point on them yesterday, and here they are. President Trump welcomed Russian interference and lied about it. Generally, President Trump's written answers to Robert Mueller were untruthful. That was new, Jeffrey. Trump encouraged WikiLeaks, as we know, and Robert Mueller found that problematic, to say the least, as he said. Trump was not exonerated of obstruction of justice. Robert Mueller fears that accepting foreign help in campaigns is now our new normal. And Robert Mueller himself was not seeking the job as the FBI director, as President Trump falsely claimed. So those are things that really can't go unfinished. I mean, having a president lie to a prosecutor who's investigating wrongdoing, that can't just stand. And so what happens now?
It can stand if Congress lets it stand. And you know, this is a political problem now, and the question is, what, if anything, Congress is going to do about it? Look, you know, the Mueller report, this was sort of the books on tape version of the Mueller report. It was not a movie version. It was low-key. It was not great theater. But the facts are the facts. And if you listened to what Mueller said, and if you heard his ratification of the repeated examples of obstruction of justice, you could be outraged. But, you know, was it riveting theater? No. And that's the question of, you know, how our politics evolves. Does it go on the substance or on the theater?
You know, my friend Josh Gerstein of Politico notes this morning that Democrats have looked to Robert Mueller to deliver them now 3 times, really, to tell them what to do. And he's just not going to do it. Democrats have always had a tough choice, and this morning they still have the tough choice of how they want to address it. And the question is, you know, are they any closer to making that tough choice this morning?
Literally just reading that piece as I sat down here by Josh.
But it's right. I think it's the right way to frame it.
Absolutely. And he lays it out very clearly, which is essentially this is the third bite at the apple with most of the same fact set, a couple of new ones, as Ellison laid out, but mostly the same fact set. And Americans, after the report came out in April, have not really appeared to be moved beyond where they were. They were hoping, Democrats, there was going to be a pretty forceful move among their caucus toward impeachment, or at least some were, so that this was not a choice they were making. There was one more Democrat who moved toward impeachment last night. There's a lot. It's more than 90, but it's still less than half the Democratic caucus. And so they are proceeding with lawsuits to try to get testimony from reluctant or unwilling witnesses like Don McGahn. It sounds like they're going to go to court to try to get underlying grand jury information related to McGahn and former White House counsel and other witnesses. But they are still ultimately going to have to decide how they want to take on Donald Trump, and trying to sort of leave it up to Mueller to figure it out for them, or the courts to figure it out for them. I don't know how much longer they can do that.
And so, Jeffrey, that's what's next, either court battles or drumming up some more, I guess, enthusiasm for impeachment, but it didn't seem like that's what the upshot of yesterday
I mean, I don't see how you could see Mueller's testimony and the reaction to it and think Donald Trump is going to be impeached. I mean, it just doesn't look like it's going to happen. Now, you can say that's a good thing or a bad thing, but you look at the politics. Now, Democrats do have a way forward, which is to continue the investigation.
Right.
It is certain that if you listen to his testimony and read the report, you need to hear from not the prosecutor, but the witnesses.
Right, but they're the White House is stonewalling.
The White House is stonewalling.
Court battle.
Yeah, and there has to, I mean, that's their only option. I mean, there is no excuse for Don McGahn not to be testifying, for Corey Lewandowski not to be testifying.
And there's a big difference between McGahn and Corey Lewandowski. For the life of me, I do not understand why they haven't put Corey Lewandowski before a congressional hearing, who has no claim of privilege that could even be adjudicated. There's not even a case there, so we would have to show
because he was never a government official, right. So that you couldn't have any sort of executive privilege issues. But They haven't done it yet. And it is worth noting that, yes, the Democrats have had a tough time with objections and interference from the White House. But through 8 months of controlling Congress, they have investigated successfully nothing, as far as I can tell. And that's a pretty lame record.
No, it's true. And it's also, look, at this point, and you would know this better than me, if there is recourse for defying these subpoenas, White House officials and non-government officials like Corey Lewandowski, they're not facing it yet. Are there arrests that could be made? Are there contempt charges, huge fines, anything? None of that has been done. And so what has happened is, if anyone is surprised that Donald Trump and his associates don't believe that they need to go by normal procedure, then they haven't been paying attention for the last 2.5 years. And basically, Donald Trump is going to do what he can get away with always. And if they can get away with not responding to these subpoenas, they're going to.
And again, we are left this morning with the list of what he can get away with, because Robert Mueller, I think, put a point on that largely with yes or no answers, and Allison read it. He welcomed Russian interference and lied about it. He was generally untruthful in his written answers. The encouraging of WikiLeaks was problematic. He's not exonerated of obstruction. It was out there in the Mueller report for anyone who chose to read it, but it may be out there in a little bit greater volume this morning.
I don't know that I honestly think that this made a difference. It's hard for me to see how this, in the middle of summer, after this report has been in existence for months, it has been, by the way, a bestseller in annotated forms. So people are reading it, and it still isn't moving public opinion. I thought it was very notable, the distinction between the two hearings. Mueller, as we've discussed, repeatedly here, had a pretty halting performance in the morning, and it was hard to watch. He got better in the afternoon, but it also struck me that he didn't really want to be relitigating the president's conduct. He did want to talk about efforts by foreign entities and foreign governments to undermine U.S. democratic institutions, and he was sort of making a laser call for that, and that got a lot less attention. And I have to wonder, if the Intelligence Committee had gone first, would that have impacted how people looked at this? We're never going to know, but he seemed not to want to get into relitigating various acts by the president that he had already decided not to make a decision about.
And as has been pointed out, Republicans, by and large, with the exception of Will Hurd, didn't bring up the Russia interference. Now, Devin Nunes, Congressman Devin Nunes, who has become a very close ally of President Trump, spelled out in his statement the entire alternate universe of that this is a witch hunt, that this was all smoke and mirror. I don't even know, that their whole argument that obviously Robert Mueller disagreed with. However, some people have wondered, is Devin Nunes the new DNI? Was that an audition? Was that to get the president's attention? And will he become the director of national intelligence?
I've heard those rumors. There's also John Ratcliffe, another congressman, was in with the president last week, and he is rumored to be up for DNI and other positions possibly. I don't think you can attribute necessarily wanting a specific job to anybody's performance. These are people who have been pretty protective of the president over the last 2 years. I do think it is worth noting that if a fraction of the behavior that was described by President Trump or his aides had been conducted by the Obama administration, the same Republicans would have been correctly calling for investigations. And yesterday, to Jeffrey's point, if Congress isn't going to do anything, I'm not really sure what there is to do. So
right, and this is a choice that they have. Congress, not the only group of Democrats with a high public profile right now. There's also the presidential candidates who will take the stage next week in 2 CNN debates, which we will carry live. I'm curious, Jeffrey, about how they handle this.
So am I, and they seem to be following, by and large, the pattern that the Democrats followed during the midterm elections, which is talking about health care, which is talking about the issues that affect people's lives. Joe Biden is somewhat different. Joe Biden has talked often about the sort of existential challenge that Donald Trump presents to how the American government functions. But the others, Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders, seem to be talking more about issues. Again, I agree with Maggie that I don't think Mueller's testimony changed the political dynamics in the country in any profound way. So I would expect, ritual denunciations of Donald Trump, but quick pivots from the presidential candidates to health care, jobs, and sort of the more substantive agenda.
And Maggie, for the president's part, now that this is over, certainly the Mueller portion of this is officially over, the president goes back to attacking the squad, making racist tweets. What?
Look, he's going to continue to try to elevate the squad as his opponent for a long time until there's a Democratic nominee, and then he's going to try to tether the Democratic nominee to the squad, and depending on who the nominee is, they may have trouble distancing themselves from the squad. But I have to say, one thing that strikes me, Republicans should be careful what they wish for, because if, let's say, Ilhan Omar ends up really damaged, if she ends up, if any of their allegations against her prove true, that's actually going to be pretty easy for Democrats to distance themselves from her. So at some point, this race is going to become Donald Trump versus an actual candidate. I'm not clear that Donald Trump is helped by the end of Mueller the way that his folks think that he is. I think Mueller has been a pretty useful foil for him for 2 years to look like he is being attacked unfairly. There are a lot of people, not just Republicans, who think that, or not just, the most committed Trump voters who think that. Now it's going to be a lot about his behavior and the economy and what people have done, and it's going to look at real issues. It's going to look at what he has done for the working class. It's going to be harder to obscure that. So I'm not sure long term this is a huge benefit.
And I think what you might see is the president try to use Robert Mueller more. I think it'll be the president who refers to Robert Mueller's testimony yesterday. And as we have seen in some cases, though, Maggie, and you write about this all the time, sometimes he goes too far. Sometimes there's overreach. His glee, or his purported glee, or the way they were trying to portray the glee yesterday, he may go even further with that today to the point where it gets him in some kind of trouble.
Anger is sometimes glee with him, and that's, I think, what you saw yesterday when he was talking to reporters. He was described to me by everybody who interacted with him yesterday as happy and in a good mood, and he was enjoying watching. He was taking note of the trouble Mueller was having earlier. He watched more of the first hearing than the second hearing in real time. But sometimes he goes, to your point, he goes overboard, and he was extremely wound up yesterday. So we'll see how that plays.
Maggie Haberman, Jeffrey Toobin, thank you very much.
Good morning.
Good morning to you. So what will Democrats do now? Up next, we talked to a Democrat who questioned Mueller. How's she feeling this morning? This morning, the question for Democrats after Robert Mueller's testimony is what now? Joining us now is Democratic Congresswoman Karen Bass. She serves on the Judiciary Committee, and she questioned Robert Mueller yesterday. Congresswoman, great to have you here in studio with us.
Thank you.
Let me play the moment that you got to question Robert Mueller yesterday for everyone who may have missed it.
But your investigation actually found substantial evidence that McGahn was ordered by the president to fire you, correct?
Yes.
Did the president's personal lawyer do something the following day in response to that news report?
I'd refer you to the coverage of this in the report.
So the president told McGahn directly to deny that the president told him to have you fired. Can you tell me exactly what happened?
I can't beyond what's in the report.
Were those satisfying answers to you?
Well, I would have loved to have heard him provide more context, but we were prepared that he was going to stick to the report. But even sticking to the report, we felt was powerful for him to confirm things that were in the report.
I mean, what you were trying to get at was the obstruction of justice piece,
right.
The Don McGahn piece that people say is central to the obstruction of justice. If you're telling your White House counsel to lie, if you're changing documents, if you're providing a cover story, all of those things, that is the definition of obstruction of justice.
Exactly, to lie and then to cover it up. And so to have him confirm that that's what was in the report, because remember, when the AG came out, when Barr came out and said the report completely exonerates the president, there's no collusion, he really tainted public opinion in that respect. And there are a lot of people, I've run into people who didn't understand why they would even bother reading the report. And so to us, to be able to have him verify things that were in the report was significant in and of itself.
Well, I mean, you've heard some of the reviews of what happened with Robert Mueller yesterday. He was circumspect to the point some people felt of being ineffective. You heard him. He kept saying, I refer you to the report, instead of saying yes. He could have just answered you with a yes or no.
Right.
And so do you think that yesterday changed anything?
Well, I do think that it changed things, and we'll see in the coming days. I mean, I think that it was illustrated for the American public. He said he was not exonerated. He said that he could not say that he didn't obstruct justice. We know that he's limited by the OIC report. We know that, and he said that. Now, when Representative Lieu was questioning him, he pretty much said that because of that, that was why he didn't say there was obstruction of justice. Now, we know a couple hours later, he pulled that back, but why did he pull that back? I think he told Representative Lieu what was actually.
Then why did he pull it back?
Well, maybe he pulled it back because he's trying to stick to what came out of the White House. But I think he was pretty clear the first time.
Look, as we know, the Democrats in the House have been debating now for years whether or not to move forward with impeachment.
Actually, not for years.
Well, I mean, it feels like there has been impeachment talk almost since the president
January 2017.
Okay, January 2017. And so, did yesterday change anything in terms of that talk or the momentum?
Well, we'll see. But reality is that, yes, there was talk the moment of the inauguration. But what is true is Democrats have only been in power for 7 months. And 2 of those months were really dead. There was the shutdown the first month. The Republicans were very late in making committee assignments. So we really didn't even hit our stride until March. So you're only talking about a few months.
Okay, so where are you with impeachment?
Well, I mean, I think we have a lot further to go. We are going to go to court to enforce the subpoena over McCann. I think there's several other witnesses. There's all of the committees that are involved in various aspects of oversight and investigation. We went 2 years with no oversight, no investigation of this administration. So I think we have a ways to go.
So you're staying the course. You're going to go to court, and then you'll all decide what you're going to do.
Yeah, I'm staying the course. You know, there's many of my colleagues, especially on the Judiciary Committee, that feel we need to begin the inquiry now. But I think that we need to take it a few steps further.
I want to talk to you about what's happening on the Judiciary Committee today. There's
other work we do.
Yeah, the work that you do that is, I mean, equally important.
Absolutely,
certainly with what's happening with family separations at the border. So today, you're trying to get answers because the administration says that family separations have stopped.
They have not stopped. So what the administration is saying is that they have stopped because they have stopped in most cases taking kids away from their parents. But when is a grandparent, an aunt, an uncle, or a sibling not a family? So there are cases of grandparents who have come to the border with infants, with toddlers. They separate those children and then call them unaccompanied minors. Tell me how a 1-year-old, a 2-year-old could be an unaccompanied minor. So they have just redefined family. The other thing is that they have determined that some parents are not eligible to stay with their children.
Who?
Based
The
on
criminals?
what? Well, somebody with a criminal conviction. But, you know, if you think about that, we have a child welfare system in this country. They make a determination whether or not a parent is an abuser or is neglectful of their child. That social workers are involved. A court is involved. Since when is a Border Patrol agent responsible for that? So we have a humanitarian crisis at the border that is being dealt with like a law enforcement problem.
And to your point, some of the people who are being called criminals, they have perhaps a DWI in their past. Since when in this country do you separate a child from that parent?
Never. You never do that. And then also, there are the children that were separated in the beginning. We don't even know how many children they are that are still separated.
So Congress does not know at this moment how many children are still separated from their
No, and I mean, frankly, I don't believe what comes out of the administration because we know they didn't track those children to begin with. But let me just ask you this. The children that they do know that are separated, where are they now? What is going to happen to them next year? Will they be put in our foster care system that's already inundated because of the opioid crisis? It is a completely inappropriate way to deal with the situation, and I frankly believe it's state-sponsored child abuse. The idea that you would have babies who are supervised by an 8-year-old, a 9-year-old, if a parent did what is going on at the border, they would be arrested for abuse and neglect.
Well, we hope you get answers today. Obviously, we'll be following.
We're not going to stop.
Congresswoman Karen Bass, thanks so much for coming in with your insight into all of this.
Thanks for having me on.
John.
All right, it is the Robert Mueller moment that could be overshadowed by all the questions about obstruction and conspiracy. Hear Mueller's warning about the biggest threat to America's democracy, one of the biggest threats he says he has ever seen, next. So there were some topics Robert Mueller seemed reluctant to talk about during his testimony. The threat of Russian interference in the 2020 election, not one of them. Listen to his warning.
Over the course of my career, I have seen a number of challenges to our democracy. The Russian government's effort to interfere in our election is among the most serious.
Do you find evidence to suggest they'll try to do this again?
No, it wasn't a single attempt. They're doing it as we sit here. And they expect to do it during the next campaign.
They're doing it as we sit here. A stern warning from the former special counsel. Joining us now, Mike Rogers, former chair of the House Intelligence Committee and a CNN national security commentator, and Jane Harman, former ranking member of the House Intelligence Committee and currently the director, president, and CEO at the Wilson Center. And I have to warn everyone, though, we have a Republican and a Democrat here who served together.
Oh, dear.
They actually got along on
And
this
still
committee.
do.
And still do.
And still do. So that's an upset victory for America right there. Mike, I want to start with you because you heard from Robert Mueller there, and one of the few times he spoke at length, really warning, don't take your eye off the ball here. The ball here is that Russia is attacking us now.
No, absolutely. And he also added another provision in there. It didn't get a lot of attention, but he said, and other nation states are following suit. So if you watch countries like China, who were trying to do in the Pacific Rim what Russia did to us in 2016, that's, wait soon, coming to your inbox is going to be this Chinese effort to do the same thing, and other nation states as well. So it is as serious as it gets, and the consequences were low enough that that's why the Russians haven't stopped. They continue to do it. They tried it in 2018 after the 2016 election. They're going to try it again into 2020.
Well, you say the consequences were low enough. As far as I can tell, the consequences virtually non-existent, because one of the things that was stated yesterday, or at least that the special counsel agreed with, was that Russia helped, that the Trump campaign welcomed it, and then to an extent, people lied about it after the fact. And Congressman Peter Welch from Vermont, in a line of questioning there, Jane, was suggesting, is this the new normal? That campaigns can just accept this with no consequence? And the special counsel said, yes, I fear it.
Yes, he did. And to pick up on something Mike said, it's not just other nation states. Let's think North Korea and others that have good cyber capacity, but it's rogue actors too. I mean, a lot of people are really good at disinformation activity and offensive cyber, and I worry a lot. So back to what's going on now, there is a little bit of good news. The Homeland Security Department has no confirmed leadership at the top, but it does have some capacity focused on this problem. When Jay Johnson was Secretary of Homeland Security in 2016, right before the election, he announced that election machinery was critical infrastructure. And so last week in Aspen, something called the Homeland Security Experts Group, which I co-chair with Mike Chertoff, former Homeland Security Secretary, were briefed by the Homeland Security Department about what they're doing. And it's good stuff with the states. The states run election machinery, but it's not just machinery, it's disinformation. And Congress is not doing anything. Hello? And this is blinking red. The whole intelligence community knows that this happened. And I really worry, by the way, John, about all the chatter about replacing Dan Coats as the Director of National Intelligence, because that will destabilize the entire intelligence.
Well, let's talk about that since you brought it up. One of the possible replacements is rumored to be Devin Nunes, the current ranking member of the Intelligence Committee. We saw him yesterday. We know he's a close ally of the president.
He's a wrecking ball. I mean, Mike and I served on a bipartisan committee. I was a ranking member when Pete Huckstra and before him Porter Goss were chairman, but Mike was a member of the committee. He did a superb job as chairman after I left. I take full credit for him. But seriously, the committee functioned. One of the rare committees functioning on a bipartisan basis. And Nunes, I think most people would agree, just shattered any semblance of bipartisanship. And
so you don't think he'd be a good DNI?
Well, I think the DNI is the joint commander across a whole bunch of intelligence agencies, 16. I had a lot to do with the legislation, and they're supposed to speak truth to power. They're not supposed to line up with one side.
Mike, would he be an appropriate choice as DNI?
I don't think he could get confirmed by the Senate, and B, I think it would cause huge disruption. I think there would be senior executive resignations. I mean, his attitude toward the community is not one that would build on a leadership platform in the community. And I will say that Dan Coats, who has actually done a pretty good job, he's also named an executive to handle in the intelligence community to handle election security issues. And the NSA just came out yesterday and said that they're going to create this new directorate that focuses on these outside activities.
Just to remind people, we're talking about Nunes. Nunes, of course, went over to the White House, delivered some kind of political information about the investigation as it was ongoing, and that's always been controversial. I want to go back to the hearing yesterday. I think a big part of this, and you've noted the institutions are doing what they should and have the concerns that they should about the Russian attacks on the U.S. election, but you often don't hear the political leaders giving it voice, and that's so important.
Yes.
We haven't heard it from the president, who most of the time fails to even acknowledge that Russia attacked the United States, but we didn't hear it yesterday from Republicans, Mike. Will Hurd, to his credit, was the sole Republican who asked any probing questions about Russian attacks on the U.S.
Former
election.
CIA analyst.
And he got some great answers.
Yeah.
He elicited some long sentences from Robert Mueller, which wasn't easy. But the other Republicans, including Jim Jordan, had what I think in retrospect, almost shocking statements about the Russian attacks. Listen to what Jordan said.
Well, it's interesting. You can charge 13 Russians no one's ever heard of, no one's ever seen, no one's ever going to hear of them, no one's ever going to see them. You can charge them. You can charge all kinds of people who are around the president with false statements. But the guy who launches the guy who puts this whole story in motion, you can't charge him. I think that's amazing.
So he was moaning about Joseph Mifsud, which in some ways was a Republican fixation yesterday, but his lead up to it, Mike, was really interesting. You can charge 13 Russians that no one's ever heard of or will hear from again. Well, these 13 Russians attacked the United States.
Oh, no, this was serious. I was a little disappointed in his tact there. The whole reason the investigation got started was a counterintelligence investigation. And that's why those indictments of those Russians was so important to that investigation. That was the purpose of this specific investigation. And it highlights specifically the concerted effort by Russian intelligence. This was an active operation targeting the United States of America. And remember, what's so scary about this, it wasn't just that they tried to get into 26 election systems, meaning trying to get to voters themselves, which they weren't able to do, but they tried. They were very successful in social media chaos. They took a kernel of truth, they pitted black activist groups against white supremacist groups, and then they tried to get and drive a wedge and get some chaos started. And unfortunately, they were successful online in social media. And remember, been doing this for 70 years, but what changed is the Russians have figured out I can now get at you with my iPhone on your laptop, and I can talk to you. I don't have to go around and try to bribe a journalist somewhere, which they used to do in the 70s. They have now gone after the social media campaign that has proven really effective, and that's why they're coming at us
This is a direct threat to our democracy, to fair and free elections, a core of the United States for 250 years, and if we don't get at this, we're going to lose it.
Yeah, start acting like it. If it's that much of a threat, start acting like it.
And it is.
Which I think is the message we're getting from both of you. Thank you for being here, and thank you for your long careers in public service, and thanks for getting along.
Yeah.
For goodness sake.
Shocking.
All right, Allison. All right, next step, this after Robert Mueller's testimony here in Washington, CNN has learned that in a closed-door meeting last night, House Democrats pressed the party's leadership on impeachment and the legal battles ahead. Joining us now, Joe Lockhart, former Clinton White House press secretary and a CNN political commentator, Caitlin Collins, CNN White House correspondent, and former federal prosecutors, CNN legal analyst Ellie Honig and Laura Coates. Joe, I want to start with the politics, and I want to start with the now. So my question to you is, after what we saw yesterday, what now?
Well, I think Nancy Pelosi took a baby step towards impeachment yesterday in her press conference with her chairman, saying that they're going to continue to use the courts to try to compel further fact-based witnesses. But she made the point that I think, was a gift to the pro-impeachment people in saying that if we continue to be stonewalled, we will go forward if we have to. She's not going to be rushed into this. The point I think she was trying to make is we get one bite at this, and we're going to go in with the strongest possible case. So she didn't take it off the table. I don't think it moved significantly forward yesterday on impeachment. But she's listening to her caucus, and it is moving ever so slowly.
Laura, here are the things we learned yesterday from Robert Mueller's testimony. Well, learned definitively. Obviously it had been in the report, but here's what we heard. President Trump welcomed Russian interference and lied about it. Generally, Mr. Trump's written answers, to the special counsel were untruthful. Trump encouraged WikiLeaks, and that was problematic. Trump was not exonerated of obstruction of justice. Robert Mueller fears that accepting foreign help in political campaigns is our new normal. And he himself was not seeking the job as the FBI director, as President Trump has falsely claimed. And so obviously, those are unacceptable for presidents or for anyone. You can't lie to prosecutors. Your whole team of associates, not whole, but many people around you can't lie to associates. And so what now does happen in the court system?
I mean, the idea of having a president who's generally truthful should be problematic to all Americans, frankly, that notion of it. But also what he's saying to everyone was, remember, he was in front of lawmakers, and their role was to figure out how to close that gap, Allison, between what we believe should be unlawful behavior, taking foreign help, trying to get dirt from for a political opponent, having the idea of welcoming and interfere with our elections, and also what actually is indeed lawful. And lawmakers need to close that particular gap. And so in the courts, it's really reliant on what the laws existing are. And right now, there is that gap that's there. They need to close it. And until they do, they may actually have the reasonable apprehension this will continue in the future. And he said, Russia could be doing this right now as we sit here today. Until they actually make strides to change it, it won't change. One caveat, though. He mentioned the idea, and one congressman said, have you, by not prosecuting the president or any member of his team for the notions of obstruction or trying to get help, have you essentially decriminalized that aspect of it? He has not done that, but that's a trend that they should be careful about.
You know, it's interesting because when Allison reads aloud what the key findings were, that the president welcomed Russian interference and lied about it, that generally his written answers were untruthful. Caitlin, you might think that those are bad headlines for the White House, yet they are trying to portray the notion that they are gleeful this morning. So my question to you is, what will they do with this going forward? How much will we hear the president talk about Robert Mueller's performance? Is this going to be part of his new daily life?
Well, right now it looks like they want to weaponize it. I mean, they were getting started yesterday by the time Robert Mueller had just finished his second hearing, holding a call with surrogates saying, these are the talking points we want to send out in light of this. Because you're right, none of the facts changed yesterday. This report is still as damning as it was when it first came out. It still paints this portrait of a team that welcomed Russian help, that covered it up, and so forth. But they feel like they won the optics game yesterday because Robert Mueller didn't come out and have this strong performance that the president feared. It's really hard to overstate just how much his attitude changed yesterday from about 24 hours ago when he was getting up, calling people so agitated that Robert Mueller was going to be on Capitol Hill. And after watching those two hearings, seeing that it wasn't going to be what he feared it was going to be, the White House was not only breathing a sigh of relief for those aides who were worried about the president's anger, but the president himself is basically gleeful about this.
It's so interesting because it's something you see, I think, yesterday, you see in real trials, which is the difference between sort of appearance and reality. I've had that experience of putting a witness on, and I had a flashback yesterday at watching Robert Mueller of thinking, oh, this is not going well. Like, he is not presenting well. He is not sharp. People are not responding to him. Then the dust settles. The next day, you get the transcript, and you go through and you go, oh, well, this is important. This is important. And we just started the show with the lineup of really damaging things that were said. And so what's going to prevail? The gut feeling of that Mueller sort of was a dud in real time, or the lasting substance that came out of it?
Well, what does prevail with the jury? I mean, when you've had this experience.
You know, you want to say people are rational, but they're not. I mean, jurors are human beings, and a lot of times, you have to win the brain, you have to win the heart too. So,
but in a way, it's the role of the prosecutor. In this case, it'll be Congress, essentially tie it all together, put a neat bow on it. It was not his job to do all of the heavy lifting. They wanted a televised show, the movie to be better than the book. It was not his job to actually do that. It was a job to present testimony. Now that he's done that, what you saw with the Democrats who were asking questions was a narrative that they were trying to weave and make sure the American people heard the story through their eyes, through their own voices, because at the end of the day, they're the ones who have to present to the American people and do the heavy lifting.
If that was a movie, it was a silent movie, I felt.
Well, the movie turned out to be a boring documentary.
Yeah.
And I think what Mueller was determined yesterday was to not become the narrator of the story. Mm-hmm. And he was determined to make the Democrats tell the story.
Literally, he did that. Literally, he refused to read the report out loud.
And it was less dramatic, but I do think as the dust settles, I mean, I had this feeling last night. You watch a lot, and a lot of my Democratic friends were, in despair that there wasn't some knockout moment. But exactly what Allison just read as the headlines is what, when the dust settled last night, hit me. And there was some news in there yesterday. The idea that his written answers were not truthful is
That was
news.
news, yeah.
And having lived through the Clinton period where, very much most of what they focused on was the fact that in a deposition, he wasn't completely honest, and that was enough to impeach him. I think there's going to be, as the dust settles, the people who matter, as we talked about yesterday, partisans have made up their mind. It's the people in the middle. This was news to them yesterday. And as it sinks in, I think the Trump people will be a little more sanguine. I don't think the president will be, but this was not a win yesterday.
And
Trump.
one interesting aspect of yesterday was, as you saw, what the president was so pleased with is how these Republicans tried to turn the tables on Robert Mueller, talk about what they believe is this alleged bias at the FBI and the DOJ. Very few Republicans, those up there who are some of the president's closest allies, defended his behavior in the report and how his campaign acted, how they covered things up. You did not see hardly any of that, or the way he spoke to his White House counsel, Don McGahn, tried to pressure him to fire the special counsel, how he treated the attorney general. None of that was defensible, essentially, for these Republicans yesterday. So that's an interesting dynamic going forward as you watch Congress try to navigate.
One other point is, except for Congressman Will Hurd, not a single Republican over 7 hours raised any concern about the Russians attacked our elections. Yeah. Not one. And that is amazing.
What's going to happen? We have 6 weeks. First of all, congratulations to Congress for figuring out a way to get a 6-week recess.
Yes.
I need your agent. My question, Joe, is what will Democrats hear?
Berman for Congress.
What will Democrats hear when they go home?
Yeah.
On Friday over the next 6 weeks, because they won't be fully off. They'll be having town meetings. They'll be meeting with their constituents.
Yeah.
What will the Democratic voters say?
I think they'll hear from a lot of activists, which is who they hear from when they go home, that, it's time to impeach. And the numbers will grow within the caucus, but they're not going to get it to a majority in their caucus. I don't think there is, and I don't think the conversation back at home will be dominated by Mueller and Russia. And I think Nancy Pelosi is willing to let this play out in the courts. And I think only until the decision point she's going to have is if the courts indicate that without an impeachment inquiry, we're not going to give you swift justice here, then she's going to have to decide. And I can't predict which way she'll go.
Caitlin, President Trump said yesterday after it was all over, Democrats have hurt themselves very badly for 2020. Of course, unknowable at this point, but do you sense that Democrats stop talking about this? If they even were talking about this on the campaign trail, that it goes away?
I think there weren't a ton who are talking about it, because when some of these people go home to their districts, a lot of these people that Nancy Pelosi has been protecting are people who flipped these districts that had voted for the president in the prior election. So they are trying to make sure that they don't cross that line with those voters who do not care about impeachment, who care more about health care plans. So that's going to be interesting going forward if the White House does move on from this fight over impeachment that they've been dealing with, something they viewed at times as a winning strategy, and on to something like health care where they do not have a plan for health care. Where do they go with that?
I think we'll see a lot on the stages next week in Detroit, the Democratic debates. When I say we'll see a lot, we'll learn a lot from how much the Democratic candidates want to focus on this and talk about it. To our lawyers over here, I want to know what happens in court now. Does yesterday play into it, Laura, at all? Democrats, they want Don McGahn to come testify. Is the likelihood of them winning in court anytime soon higher than it was?
I don't think it is. I think the needle has not been moved, and here's why. Because the courts are reluctant to engage in political fights. They do not want to be the court that you go to first to resolve, as opposed to maybe the last recourse of a political issue. And so you have the notion of whether or not you're actually going to use them as a last resort, or say, here we are, we want to begin a process. We've been stonewalled. They ignore our subpoenas. We are a co-equal branch of government. It's our right to immediately go to you right now and seek recourse. Will be used against them, and their arguments will be, well, you haven't until now, and suddenly your discussion and strategy about somebody named Robert Mueller failed, and now you'd like the courts to intervene. That may be problematic, but in the end of the day, nothing the courts can do will change the optics problem that they actually have. However, it could strengthen the argument that says, look, the judiciary is going to stand true and stand with Congress and say, we are all co-equal branches of government. It's our job and incumbent upon us to check and balance the executive branch of government. If that's your motivation, it's not purely political, we have your back.
Yeah, I agree with Laura. I think this is going to be a really close call in the courts, whether the court says you can have McGahn as a witness or not. And what the leaders of the Judiciary Committee have been saying is we're building our case. And they tried, and I agree with Laura. If the needle moved at all yesterday, it's incrementally. The one thing I think that did help is there is a square conflict set up between Donald Trump and Don McGahn. right? Donald Trump has now said he's lied, and Robert Mueller confirmed yesterday, I credited McGahn. So if you can go to court and say, we have a direct conflict here, I think it helps your case a little bit. But at a certain point to the House, like, enough with the performance art, enough with having Hope Hicks go behind closed doors and give you nothing. And they said, good, we're going to use that as an exhibit. They keep shutting us down. Okay, you've been shut down. Now get to court, make your case. But if the court says no, you don't get McGahn, they're done. They're not going to get Hicks, Donaldson, the rest. And that's why Joe, I think, made an interesting point that Pelosi gave herself an out, which is if we continue to get shut down, we may impeach based on obstruction of Congress. It's kind of a heads I win, tails you lose scenario.
And the question is, ultimately, will Nancy Pelosi decide that she wants to inflict pain on Donald Trump in Congress or at the ballot box? And if I had to guess, her inclination is the ballot box. But she left open yesterday the possibility that if the courts don't help, they'll move forward.
Guys, thank you very much for all of the analysis of what we saw. Meanwhile, a former New York City lawmaker was one of the targets of those leaked checks. Former Vice President Joe Biden is previewing new lines of attacks against his Democratic rivals. This is ahead of next week's CNN debates. Biden told the crowd at a fundraiser in Detroit last night, "I'm not going to be as polite this time." What does that mean? Let's ask Joe Lockhart and Caitlin Collins, also joining us now, CNN political reporter Rebecca Buck. Joe, not as polite this time. What does that mean?
I think a little bit of this was just putting the other candidates on notice that if they come after him, he's ready this time. I do think the fight he wants to have, though, and I think he will pick it with Kamala Harris, is on Medicare for All. I think this is an issue. This is why I'm a little disappointed with the draw that you didn't have either Sanders or Warren on the same stage, because this is going to be a central fight of whether, and Medicare for All has to be described. It's, what Warren and Sanders and Kamala Harris sometimes have been for is abolishing private insurance. Biden is itching for that fight.
Do you know how I know you're right, that it's the fight he wants to have? Because he already started having it.
Yes.
He's already started this attack. Let's listen to what he said. He doesn't mention Senator Harris by name, but he's clearly alluding to her when he is speaking about Medicare for All.
Well, you got to find $30 to $40 trillion somewhere, and how are you going to do it? Well, I find the people who say that for Medicare for all, but they're not going to tax the middle class because you don't need to do that. Come on. What is this? Is this a fantasy world here?
Fantasy world, Rebecca. When people are 5 days before the debate, I often start thinking, we're seeing some of the debate prep come to light here, so I'm wondering if we hear more about Fantasy World next week.
Absolutely. This is all very intentional by Joe Biden. Obviously a change from his last debate performance. This is no more Mr. Nice Guy Joe Biden. But he does feel, I agree with you, Joe, he does feel that this is beneficial turf for him to be fighting this war on. Healthcare is the number one issue for voters in this election, even in the Democratic primary. Medicare for All is going to be a key fight of this election. He's even excited to have this fight with Cory Booker about policing, about criminal justice reform. Joe Biden is wanting to run this race as the moderate candidate. He's making the case that that is going to be the most beneficial to Democrats in the general election. And so in so much as he can show that through these policy fights, I think he's ready for that. He's excited for that.
But also the knives are really starting to come out here, because you saw that some candidates were afforded a boost by going after Joe Biden in that last debate. So now they know to prepare, because a lot of other people are going to try to capitalize on that moment that really did boost Kamala Harris. So you're going to see other candidates try to take that same tactic. Cory Booker's already trying to do it. So I think Joe Biden is just essentially getting prepared for whatever is going to come his way.
Now he's ready. He was clearly taken aback by Kamala in that first debate. I think this time you're going to see a much more aggressive, much more prepared Joe Biden. At least that's what his campaign is hoping.
And as John has said, it's already starting to happen. So let's listen to what Senator Cory Booker has said yesterday, I believe, about Joe Biden and how he plans, it sounds like, to be critical of him about his crime bill passed.
And now he's unveiled his crime bill for a guy who helped to be an architect of mass incarceration. This is an inadequate solution to what is a raging crisis in our country.
So, Joe, before you respond to that, here is how Joe Biden seems to be responding. He said about attacks like that, "I'm not going to be as polite this time, because this is the same person who asked me to come to California and nominate her in the convention. That's obviously about Senator Kamala Harris. If they want to argue about the past, I can do that. I got a past I'm proud of. They got a past that's not quite so good.
You know, in fact, the former vice president, I believe we have this sound, goes right after Cory Booker and his record as mayor of Newark, New Jersey. Listen.
Let's hear that.
If you look at the mayor's record in Newark, one of the provisions I wrote in the crime bill, a pattern and practice of misbehavior, his police department was stopping and frisking people, mostly African-American men. We took action against them. The Justice Department took action against them, held the police department accountable.
All right, there you go. So, Joe, he is going after Kamala Harris, though he's using the pronoun they. And what you hear there about Cory Booker.
Yeah, I expect there to be less fireworks between Harris and Biden and more fireworks between Booker and Biden.
Mm-hmm.
Booker needs to be relevant. He's nowhere in the polls, and I think it's hard for him because he wants to be positive. That's his brand. But he's got to get in this race, and I think he will go. But I think they all go after Biden at their own peril, because particularly older African Americans who are reliable voters have an enormous amount of goodwill towards Biden. They know him much better than they know Cory Booker or Kamala Harris. Not that they can't do well eventually. And going after them in going after Biden in sort of a gratuitous way, I think actually could backfire on them and could solidify.
Well, that's what I find so interesting about Joe Biden in his direct comments about Senator Harris, her record, and Senator Booker's record on issues of race in civil rights. You could look at that and say, it's risky for a 76-year-old white guy to be going after two African-American senators on issues of race, but he feels comfortable, perhaps, Rebecca, because of what Joe's talking about, his long relationship.
He does, and I think he recognizes now, relative to the last debate, that he does need to engage with these rivals. He can't just go in as the elder statesman. He can't just stay above the fray. He really needs to engage and defend his record. But I think there is a risk here also for Joe Biden. There's a risk in the other candidates going after Joe Biden, but I think there might be a bigger risk for Joe Biden punching back, playing their game, because he is so well liked right now, but you could start to see his favorability slip if he goes after these candidates in a way that isn't strategic.
Yeah, and that's why I think a lot of what you're going to see in the lead up to the debate is conditioning it, and you may not see quite as an aggressive Biden on the debate stage, but it's a little bit of a brush bash pitch to several of his rivals.
One topic that always ranks as number one for Republicans, not as much for Democrats, but is certainly in the collective consciousness right now, is immigration. And President Trump just got a defeat from a California federal judge who blocked the president's latest asylum directive, whereby a refugee would have to apply for asylum outside of the U.S. If they were transiting through a second country, they wouldn't be able to come to the U.S. until they had already done that, and the judge said that doesn't work.
Yeah, a defeat in California, a win in a court in D.C. The question is, of course, they're likely going to appeal this going forward, but you're seeing this ongoing struggle that the administration is having. They're still trying to carry out policies that they tried since day one, essentially, with the president at DHS. They're just trying to do it in a different way, but now they're facing all this upheaval, of course, with the leadership at DHS. There are so many knives out there, it's kind of hard to know which direction to look in. But as they are making these asylum fights, essentially how they feel in the West Wing is that they're doing what the president has wanted since day one. Whether or not it's going to be effective and be successful in courts is another question, but they are seeing this widespread frustration just with the Ninth Circuit Court or certain courts that they feel are like the only ones that are holding the president back from getting these asylum rules, these changes that he wants.
And even if they lose in court or delayed in court, what they get is the political play,
which is exactly what they got with the ICE raids, where the president was tweeting that, you know, so many hundreds of thousands of people were going to be deported. And then, of course, ICE confirmed only 35 people ended up being deported as part of those raids. But it's the messaging strategy that works for the president. And we see it when we speak to voters on the campaign trail, when we're out with him at rallies, where they say, actually, he's doing what we want on this, even though if you look at the numbers, they're not that much different.
And I think what he's hoping is the Democrats will try to outdo each other on who can be the most lenient for the border, so he can make this case that Democrats are for open borders. That, you know, a lot got, the Kamala Harris Biden exchange got a lot of the attention from the first debate, but really on that first night, the Democrats were sort of leaning, you know, very, you know, on decriminalizing, and that plays into Trump's strategy.
All right, thank you all very much for